Imagine a country that believed it could never fall, a land of boundless wealth, gold rushes, and railroads stretching from ocean to ocean. But then, almost overnight, banks vanished. Millions lost their jobs, and the glittering age of wealth turned to dust. This isn't the Great Depression of the 1930s. It happened 4 decades earlier, during America's first great economic collapse of the industrial age. This is the story of the Panic of 1893, the depression that shattered the illusion of America's unstoppable prosperity. By the late 1800s, America was bursting with confidence. The Civil War was decades behind, and industry was booming. Factories belched smoke into the sky. Railroads connected distant frontiers. Cities grew faster than ever before. But behind the prosperity, something dangerous was brewing, a fragile system built on speculation, corruption, and gold. The term Gilded Age came from Mark Twain, a time that looked golden on the surface. But beneath the shine, it was raw. Big businesses like Carnegie Steel, Standard Oil, and J.P. Morgan's banks dominated the economy. But ordinary Americans were left behind, squeezed by rising prices and falling wages. And much of that wealth wasn't real, it was borrowed. Railroads, the lifeblood of America's economy, had become the speculative bubble of their time. Hundreds of companies borrowed massive sums from banks, promising profits that would surely come. Railroads were more than just transportation. They were Wall Street's favorite fantasy. Each new line promised fortunes. Investors from London to New York poured their money into railroad stocks. But the truth was brutal. By 1890, America had built too many railroads, more than the economy could support. Fierce competition drove profits down. To hide their mounting losses, companies resorted to creative accounting and financial tricks. But behind the scenes, foreign investors were watching nervously. They were the ones funding this expansion, and they demanded one thing above all else: gold. Because the US dollar was tied to gold, the entire system depended on America's gold reserves. And those reserves were starting to vanish. The government's vaults were being drained, setting the stage for a nationwide crisis of confidence. The breaking point arrived in early 1893. A railroad giant, the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad, suddenly went bankrupt. This was a shockwave. This wasn't just any company. It was one of the biggest employers in the country, a pillar of the industrial economy. Investors panicked. If a company that massive could fail, who was safe? Bank runs began. People rushed to withdraw their savings, not in paper money, which they now saw as worthless, but in solid gold. Within months, the panic had spread like a contagion across the entire nation. Over 500 banks collapsed, taking the life savings of countless families with them. 15,000 businesses shut their doors for good. Millions were thrown out of work, with no safety net to catch them. Cities filled with the jobless and desperate, while farms across the country fell to foreclosure. The once booming America had been brought to its knees, humbled and broken. The depression that followed was brutal, lasting nearly 6 years, one of the longest and most severe in U.S. history. The human cost was staggering. In major industrial centers like Chicago, unemployment hit a catastrophic 40%. In New York, entire neighborhoods starved, with people fighting over scraps of food. Farmers, the backbone of the nation, couldn't afford to transport their crops because the remaining railroad fees were too high, so they let their harvests rot in the fields while people starved in the cities. Out of this desperation came a powerful symbol of protest: Coxey's Army. It was a march of desperate, unemployed workers led by a man named Jacob Coxey, walking all the way from Ohio to Washington, D.C. Their demand was radical for its time: a federal jobs program, for the government to create work and put people back on their feet. They were met with ridicule, arrested for trespassing, and ultimately ignored by the powers in Washington. But their march symbolized a historic turning point, the beginning of America's long and bitter struggle between capital and labor, between concentrated wealth and the demands of democracy. As the Depression deepened, politicians scrambled, pointing fingers and blaming each other. President Grover Cleveland, a firm believer in minimal government intervention, clung to one principle above all: the gold standard. He was convinced that the integrity of the nation's economy depended on every dollar being backed by gold. He refused to print more money or expand credit, believing it would lead to hyperinflation and destroy the economy's foundation. But that decision, while perhaps fiscally conservative, only deepened the pain for millions of suffering Americans. Meanwhile, a powerful new movement rose from the ashes of the economy. This coalition of farmers and factory workers demanded a radical shift. They wanted the government to also use silver to back the currency, a policy cailled by bimetallism. This would increase the money supply, make it easier to pay off debts, and raise crop prices. The debate over gold versus silver. The nation apart. It was famously symbolized years later in the Cross of Gold speech by William Jennings Bryan. This wasn't just a dry debate about monetary policy, it was a battle for the soul of the country. It was about who America's economy truly served: the bankers and industrialists of the East Coast, or the working people of the heartland. By 1897, the first signs of recovery finally began to emerge. New gold discoveries in Alaska and South Africa replenished global reserves, easing the pressure on the U.S. financial system. The economy slowly began to stabilize and grow again, but the scars of the Depression remained etched deep in the national psyche. America's blind faith in laissez-faire capitalism, the idea that the market would always correct itself without government help, was shattered. And in the vacuum left by this broken ideology, new power structures emerged. Corporate monopolies grew even larger as they bought up failed competitors for pennies on the dollar. Labor unions, once on the fringe, gained new strength and legitimacy as workers organized to protect themselves. And eventually, the Federal Reserve itself was created 2 decades later, born directly from the lessons of 1893, with a mission to prevent another such collapse. The panic of 1893 had changed everything. It was the dress rehearsal for the Great Depression. Now, here's the twist. If you strip away the top hats, railroads, and gold coins, you'll find that the same fundamental pattern has repeated itself again and again throughout our history. In 1929, the speculative bubble wasn't railroads. It was stocks. People borrowed heavily to buy shares, convinced the market could only go up. In 2008, it wasn't gold reserves. It was the supposed safety of subprime mortgages, packaged into complex financial instruments nobody truly understood. And today, what might it be? Some experts point to spiraling corporate debt, others to the auto loan market, or even bubbles in the tech sector. Each and every time, we convince ourselves, this time is different. We believe we've created new safeguards, that we're smarter than the generations before us. And each time, we're proven wrong. The specific mechanisms evolve, but human nature does not. The powerful forces of greed, irrational optimism, and herd-like speculation always seem to overtake caution. And when the bubble inevitably pops, it's always the ordinary people who pay the highest price. So what can we learn from a financial panic that happened more than 130 years ago? The lessons are timeless. Lesson 1. Prosperity built on rampant speculation and excessive debt is an illusion. It's a house of cards. If the foundation is just borrowed credit, the entire structure will eventually fall. Lesson 2. Governments that wait too long to act, or that prioritize abstract financial principles over human suffering, only make the crisis worse. Ignoring the problem doesn't make it go away. Lesson 3. Every generation must critically question who truly benefits from economic growth. Because as history shows us time and again, the rewards of a boom are rarely shared equally. But the pain of a bust always trickles down. The panic of 1893 wasn't just a financial event, it was a moral reckoning. It was the moment when America was forced to learn that unchecked greed and inequality could destroy even the mightiest empire of industry. So the next time you hear someone confidently say, the economy will always bounce back, remember 1893? Ask yourself, at what cost? If you found this story revealing, give this video a like, share it with someone who believes history doesn't repeat itself, and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden collapses that shaped our world. Because to understand the future, we must first confront the shadows of our past. Thanks for watching.